Montana Territory, 1882. The summer drought had turned the valley into a wasteland of cracked earth and withered hopes. Dust devils danced across the parched landscape as Thomas Larson surveyed what remained of the ranch he had inherited from his father. At 32, he had spent a lifetime building walls, not just the wooden fences that marked his property, but the invisible barriers he constructed around his heart. "Another day alone is another day safe," Thomas muttered to himself as he drove the final nail into the repaired corral. This mantra had guided him through years of solitude, convincing himself that the ache in his chest was the price of survival. In a world where men like him ended up swinging from cottonwood trees or beaten to death in alleyways, loneliness seemed the kindest fate available. The neighboring ranches had families, men with wives who brought them lemonade on hot afternoons, children who raced through tall grass and dreamed of growing up to be just like their fathers. Thomas had 400 acres, 63 head of cattle, a loyal cattle dog named Scout, and memories that kept him awake at night. Memories of a boy named James back in Missouri, whose smile had once made Thomas believe in impossible things, until the day they were discovered behind the schoolhouse and James' family moved away without a word. Thomas had learned his lesson then. Men like him weren't meant for love. They were meant for shadows and secrets, for longing glances quickly averted, for lies told so often they almost felt like truth. So he had come west as far as his savings would take him, to build a life where no one knew him well enough to discover what he kept hidden. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled Thomas from his thoughts. He squinted against the setting sun as a lone rider emerged from the haze of dust, making his way down the long road to the ranch house. Visitors were rare enough to put Thomas on alert, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver on his hip. The stranger rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the amber sky. As he drew closer, Thomas could make out more details. A weathered Stetson pulled low, a blue bandana protecting his face from the dust, and eyes that seemed to hold the vastness of the Montana sky within them. "Evening," the rider called, pulling his horse to a stop and lowering the bandana. His face was striking, strong jawline softened by full lips, skin tanned by countless days under the western sun, and a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Name's Adam Lawson. I heard you might be hiring." Thomas hadn't been hiring, hadn't even considered it, but as he looked at the state of his ranch, fences needing repair, cattle requiring movement to better grazing land, and the barn roof that wouldn't last another winter, he realized he could use the help. "What brings you to these parts?" Thomas asked, keeping his distance, studying the stranger with cautious eyes. Adam dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback, been riding with an outfit up north. Time came for a change. Something flickered across his face, regret perhaps, or determination. "Looking to put down roots somewhere quiet, somewhere I can." He paused, searching for words, turn things around. There was something in Adam's voice, a note of sincerity wrapped in weariness, that resonated with Thomas. He recognized a man running from something because he'd been doing the same for years. "I can offer room and board plus $20 a month," Thomas said finally, "trial basis. If it doesn't work out, we part ways, no hard feelings." Adam nodded, extending his hand. Fair enough. When their hands met, Thomas felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced in years, a connection that went beyond the physical touch of skin on skin. He pulled away quickly, turning toward the house to hide the color rising in his cheeks. "Stable's that way," he said gruffly. "Get your horse settled, then come to the house. Supper will be ready soon." As Thomas walked away, he felt Adam's eyes following him, and for the first time in years, he questioned whether solitude was truly the safest path after all. The first few weeks established a careful rhythm between the two men. They worked from sunrise to sunset, moving cattle to greener pastures, repairing fence lines damaged by winter storms, and preparing the ranch for the approaching cold season. Adam proved himself a capable ranch hand, skilled with horses and cattle alike and unexpectedly handy with tools. "Where'd you learn carpentry?" Thomas asked one afternoon as they worked together on the barn roof. Adam hammered another nail into place before answering. "My father was a carpenter back in Pennsylvania, taught me everything he knew before consumption took him." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "That was before I headed west and took up cowboying." "You've been all over then." Wherever the trail led, Adam confirmed. Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, seen a lot of country, worked a lot of ranches. His eyes met Thomas's. Never found a place that felt right to stay. Thomas looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity in Adam's gaze. Most men don't, he said quietly. That's the way of things out here. But as days turned into weeks, Thomas found his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. He caught himself watching Adam when the younger man wasn't looking, observing the play of muscles under his shirt as he chopped wood, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the gentle hands that could calm even the most skittish colt. They began talking during evening meals, really talking, not just exchanging information about the next day's work. Adam spoke of his travels, of the characters he'd met on cattle drives and in boomtowns across the West. Thomas, who had rarely shared his past with anyone, found himself telling Adam about his childhood in Missouri, his father's dreams for the Montana ranch, and even his love of poetry, books he kept hidden under his bed as if they were shameful secrets. One night, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular display of stars overhead, Adam asked the question Thomas had been dreading. "You ever have a woman waiting for you somewhere, Thomas?" Thomas stiffened, his hands tightening around his coffee mug. "No," he said shortly, "never found the right match." "Strange," Adam said thoughtfully. "Handsome man like you with his own spread, most would have found a wife by now." "Not everyone's meant for that life," Thomas replied, keeping his voice neutral despite the pounding of his heart. "No," Adam agreed quietly, "I suppose not everyone is." Their eyes met in the darkness, and for a moment Thomas thought he saw understanding there, a recognition that went beyond words. But then Adam looked away and the moment passed, leaving Thomas wondering if he'd imagined the connection. The first snow of the season arrived in early November, transforming the landscape overnight. Thomas woke to a world blanketed in white, the familiar contours of his ranch rendered new and mysterious by the heavy snowfall. He found Adam already in the kitchen, stoking the fire and brewing coffee. "Going to be a cold one," Adam observed, passing Thomas a steaming mug. "Figured we should check on the herd in the north pasture, make sure they found shelter." The ride to the north pasture was challenging, their horses struggling through drifts nearly belly-deep in places. The cold bit through Thomas's heavy coat, making him grateful for Adam riding beside him, a solid presence against the vast whiteness of the winter landscape. They located most of the cattle huddled in a protected ravine, but as they were turning to head back, Adam spotted tracks leading toward the creek. "Looks like a few strays," he said, pointing to the hoof prints partially filled with fresh snow. "Better find them before they freeze." They followed the tracks to the creek, which was already beginning to ice over. 3 young steers stood trapped on a patch of ground surrounded by water too deep to cross safely. "I'll go," Adam said, already dismounting. "The ice might not hold both of us." "Wait," Thomas protested, but Adam was already picking his way across the partially frozen creek, testing each step before committing his weight. Thomas watched, heart in his throat, as Adam made his way to the stranded cattle. He had almost reached them when a crack echoed across the winter silence and the ice gave way beneath him. Adam disappeared beneath the surface with a startled shout, and Thomas was moving before conscious thought could form. He grabbed a coiled rope from his saddle and raced to the edge of the creek. "Adam!" he shouted, scanning the churning water desperately. Adam resurfaced several yards downstream, gasping and flailing against the current. Thomas ran along the bank, calling out encouragement until he found a spot where he could throw the rope. His first cast fell short, but the second landed within Adam's reach. With numbing hands, Adam grabbed hold and Thomas pulled with all his strength, dragging him toward the shore. By the time Thomas hauled Adam onto solid ground, the younger man was shivering violently, his lips blue with cold. "We need to get you warm," Thomas said urgently, helping Adam onto his horse before mounting behind him to keep him from falling. The steers would have to fend for themselves. Adam's life was what mattered now. The ride back to the ranch house seemed endless, with Adam's shivering body pressed against Thomas's chest, his wet clothes turning to ice in the bitter wind. By the time they reached the house, Adam was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. Thomas carried him inside and laid him before the fireplace. With efficient movements born of desperation, he stripped away Adam's frozen clothing and wrapped him in every blanket he could find. He built up the fire until it roared, then held Adam close, sharing his own body heat. "Stay with me," Thomas murmured, rocking slightly as he cradled Adam against his chest. "Don't you dare leave now." Slowly, Adam's shivering subsided and color returned to his face. His eyes fluttered open, disoriented at first, then focusing on Thomas with dawning awareness. "You saved me," he whispered. "You nearly got yourself killed," Thomas replied, relief making his voice rough. "What were you thinking, going out on that ice alone?" "Couldn't lose the cattle," Adam said weakly. "Know how much they mean to you." Thomas shook his head, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. "They're just cattle, Adam, they can be replaced." His voice broke on the next words. "You can't be." The admission hung between them, more revealing than Thomas had intended. Adam's eyes widened slightly, and he reached up with a trembling hand to touch Thomas's face. "Thomas," he said softly, a question in his voice. Instead of answering, Thomas did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to Adam's. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, giving Adam every chance to pull away, but Adam didn't pull away. Instead, his hand moved to the back of Thomas's neck, drawing him closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally separated, Thomas rested his forehead against Adam's, eyes closed, heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. "I've wanted to do that since the day you rode in," Adam confessed, his voice a whisper. Thomas pulled back slightly, searching Adam's face. "How did you know I would, that I might?" "I didn't," Adam said, "but I hoped. I saw something in you that first day, something familiar, something I've been looking for my whole life." Thomas felt exposed, as if all his carefully guarded secrets were suddenly visible. "This is dangerous," he warned. "Men like us." "I know the risks," Adam said. "I've been running from them for years, had to leave my last job when the foreman started asking questions about why I never showed interest in the girls at the dance hall." "Is that why you came here? To start over?" Adam nodded, heard about a rancher who kept to himself, never married, never went to town dances, thought maybe you were like me, or at least wouldn't ask questions I couldn't answer. Thomas laughed softly, shaking his head in wonder. "All this time I thought I was hiding so well." "Only visible to those looking with the right eyes," Adam said, reaching for Thomas's hand. That night changed everything. As winter settled over the Montana landscape, Thomas and Adam found warmth in each other that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. In the privacy of the ranch house, they discovered each other slowly, learning the language of touch and whispers that neither had dared speak before. But even as their relationship deepened, the outside world remained a threat. They maintained careful distance whenever anyone visited the ranch, the occasional supply delivery, neighboring ranchers checking on winter survival, the county tax assessor making his rounds. They developed signals and routines, separate bedrooms kept in appearance of propriety, conversations about fictitious sweethearts in distant towns. "Sometimes I hate this hiding," Adam confessed one night as they lay tangled together in Thomas's bed. "Having to pretend we're nothing more than ranch owner and hired hand when anyone's watching." Thomas stroked Adam's hair, understanding the frustration all too well. "It's the price of staying alive," he said softly. "Of staying together." "Do you ever think about going somewhere else?" Adam asked. "I've heard San Francisco has places where men like us can find each other, live more openly." Thomas considered this. He'd spent his entire adult life building this ranch, fulfilling his father's dream. The thought of leaving had never occurred to him before he had something more precious than land and cattle to protect. "Would you want that?" he asked carefully. "A different life somewhere far from here?" Adam propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at Thomas with serious eyes. "I want a life with you," he said simply. "Wherever and however we can have it." The words settled into Thomas's heart, warming places that had been cold for too long. "Let me think on it," he promised, pulling Adam back into his embrace. Spring arrived with its usual mud and promise, melting away the snow and revealing the green world beneath. Thomas and Adam worked side by side, repairing winter damage, welcoming new calves, and planning improvements to the ranch that reflected their shared future. But their carefully constructed sanctuary was shattered one April afternoon when Sheriff Jenkins rode up to the ranch house, accompanied by 2 deputies. Thomas saw them approaching from the corral where he was breaking a new horse. His blood ran cold at the sight of the lawman, and he quickly signaled to Adam, who was mending a fence nearby. Their emergency plan was simple. Adam would head for the back hills if trouble came, while Thomas dealt with whatever threat presented itself. Adam nodded once, casually gathering his tools as if finishing for the day, then disappeared around the barn, hopefully to grab the emergency pack they kept ready and make for their predetermined meeting place in the foothills. Thomas approached the lawman with forced casualness, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Afternoon, Sheriff, what brings you out this way?" Sheriff Jenkins, a heavy-set man with a perpetually sour expression, dismounted stiffly. "Got some questions for you, Larson, and for that hand of yours, Lawson, isn't it?" Thomas kept his face neutral despite the fear clawing at his throat. "Adam's gone to check on the north herd, won't be back till nightfall." "Something wrong?" Jenkins exchanged glances with his deputies before answering. "Had a visitor in town yesterday, man named Harkins from up Wyoming way. Says Lawson worked for him last year, left under unusual circumstances." "Is Adam wanted for something?" Thomas asked, careful to keep his tone merely curious. "Not officially," Jenkins admitted, "but Harkins had some interesting things to say about your hands, preferences." The sheriff's mouth twisted with disgust as he spoke. "Said he caught Lawson with another man. Ran him off before he could cause trouble." Thomas's mind raced. Denial would be expected, perhaps even suspicious in its vehemence. Better to seem surprised but not overly defensive. "That's quite an accusation," he said evenly. "Adam's been a good worker, never caused any problems here. Harkins suggested we might want to look into your situation here, being as you're two unmarried men living awful isolated," Jenkins continued, his small eyes watching Thomas closely. "Said these types tend to find each other." The threat was clear, wrapped in the thin veneer of official concern. Thomas felt cold rage building beneath his calm exterior, but he kept his voice steady. "Sheriff, I've been a respected rancher in this county for 10 years, my father before me. I employ Adam Lawson because he's the best hand I've ever had. What you're implying is not only offensive but legally actionable as slander." Jenkins seemed taken aback by the controlled force of Thomas's response. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "No one's accusing you of anything yet, Larson," the sheriff said, backpedaling slightly. "Just doing due diligence based on information received." "Then consider your diligence done," Thomas replied. "Unless you have actual charges to file, I have a ranch to run." The confrontation ended in an uneasy standoff, with Jenkins promising to keep an eye on the situation before riding away with his deputies. Thomas waited until they were specks on the horizon before rushing to the barn, saddling his fastest horse, and galloping toward the meeting place in the foothills. He found Adam waiting anxiously in a small cave they had stocked with emergency supplies months ago, just in case. "They know," Thomas said without preamble, dismounting and pulling Adam into a fierce embrace. "Someone from Wyoming recognized you." Adam's face paled. "Harkins," he whispered, "has to be. I never thought he'd follow me here." "He didn't exactly," Thomas explained. "Just passed through town, planted suspicions with the sheriff." He related the conversation in detail, watching Adam's expression shift from fear to anger. "We need to leave," Adam said finally. "Tonight, they'll be watching the ranch now, looking for any excuse to act." Thomas nodded, having reached the same conclusion during his ride. "I've been thinking about this possibility," he admitted. "I have money saved enough to start fresh somewhere else, and I've kept papers ready for the sale of the ranch to my cousin back east. One telegram and it's done." Adam looked surprised. "You've planned for this all along?" "Since winter," Thomas confirmed, "since I realized I'd rather have you than everything else combined." The realization that Thomas had been preparing for this moment, had chosen him over the ranch he'd spent his life building, moved Adam deeply. He pulled Thomas close, burying his face against his neck. "Where will we go?" he asked. Thomas smiled, suddenly certain of their path despite the danger surrounding them. "California," he said. "San Francisco, like you suggested. I've heard there are places there where men like us can find a community, live more openly. Not completely free, but better than this." They gathered their essential belongings under cover of darkness, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Thomas left legal papers in the ranch house detailing the transfer of property to his cousin Matthew in Missouri, along with a letter explaining his sudden departure as a response to a lucrative business opportunity in California. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, they took one last look at the ranch from a ridge overlooking the property. Thomas felt a pang of loss for the life he was leaving behind, but when Adam's hand found his, he knew he was making the right choice. "Ready?" Adam asked softly. Thomas nodded, turning his horse westward. "Ready." Their journey west was fraught with caution. They avoided towns when possible, camping under the vast sky rather than risking hotels where questions might be asked. When they did need supplies, they entered settlements separately, maintaining the fiction of boss and employee for safety's sake. They crossed Idaho into Oregon, then followed the coast south toward San Francisco. The journey took weeks, but each mile put more distance between them and the danger behind, bringing them closer to the possibility of a new life. San Francisco in 1883 was a revelation, a bustling metropolis rising from the hills beside the bay, filled with people from every corner of the world. Thomas and Adam found lodging in a modest boarding house run by an elderly Chinese couple who asked few questions and seemed concerned only with prompt payment of rent. They spent their first weeks exploring the city, learning its rhythms and secrets. They discovered certain saloons where men like themselves gathered discreetly, places where knowing glances and careful conversations could lead to friendships with others who understood their situation. Through these connections, they heard about opportunities outside the city, a small community forming in the redwood forests north of San Francisco, where several pairs of confirmed bachelors had purchased adjacent properties, creating an unofficial sanctuary. "What do you think?" Adam asked one evening as they walked along the waterfront, discussing what they'd learned. City life or the woods? Thomas considered the question seriously. The city offered anonymity through sheer numbers but also constant vigilance. The forest community promised more freedom but less protection through obscurity. "I've been a rancher all my life," he said finally. "Never felt right in towns. What about you?" Adam smiled, taking Thomas's arm in a gesture that could pass for friendly camaraderie but meant so much more. "Wherever you are feels like home to me," he said. "But I admit I miss open spaces, miss watching the stars without buildings in the way." Their decision made, they contacted a real estate agent recommended by their new acquaintances and arranged to view available properties near the growing community in the redwoods. 2 weeks later, they became the proud owners of 40 acres nestled against a mountain, complete with a sturdy cabin and a year-round stream. Their nearest neighbors, Edward and William, lived a quarter-mile through the woods, close enough for safety and socializing, far enough for privacy. Edward had been a doctor back east before moving west with William, his business partner of 15 years. They welcomed Thomas and Adam warmly, introducing them to other couples in their loose-knit community. "We look out for each other here," Edward explained over dinner at their cabin one evening. "Keep an eye on the road for strangers, warn each other if trouble's brewing." "Most folks in the nearest town think we're just confirmed bachelors who prefer solitude," William added. "We're careful to maintain that impression. We shop in pairs but never show affection in public." Thomas nodded, understanding the precautions all too well. "Similar to how we lived in Montana, except there we were completely isolated." "Isolation is dangerous in its own way," Edward said thoughtfully. "Here we have strength in numbers, even if those numbers are small." Over the following months, Thomas and Adam built a new life in the redwood forest. They added a barn to their property, acquired a small herd of goats, and planted an extensive vegetable garden. They joined the loosely organized community events, monthly dinners that rotated between households, fishing expeditions to the nearby river, collaborative building projects when someone needed a new roof or addition. For the first time, they experienced the joy of being among people who understood them, with whom they could be themselves without fear or pretense. They could sit together by the fire, touch hands across the table, share a bed without maintaining the fiction of separate rooms. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set through the towering redwoods, Adam turned to Thomas with an expression of quiet wonder. "Do you ever think about how unlikely this is?" he asked. That day I rode onto your ranch, dust-covered and desperate for a new start. What were the chances we'd end up here together? Thomas smiled, taking Adam's hand in his. I used to think men like us weren't meant for happiness, he admitted. That loneliness was the safest choice, the only choice. And now, Adam prompted. Thomas looked around at the home they had built together, the cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, the garden beds put to rest for winter, the path leading to friends who accepted them completely. Then he looked back at Adam, whose eyes still held the same sky-blue promise they had the day he'd ridden in through the dust of a Montana summer. Now I know better, Thomas said softly. Now I know that some risks are worth taking. That finding someone to love is worth any price. He squeezed Adam's hand, that you were worth riding away from everything I thought I needed. Adam leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Thomas's in a gesture that had become their private symbol of connection. I promised to turn my life around when I came to your ranch, he whispered. Never imagined we'd turn our lives around together. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, hands intertwined, surrounded by ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of human stories. Their story of two cowboys who found each other against impossible odds, who risked everything for love, was just one small chapter in the vast narrative of the American West. But for Thomas Larson and Adam Lawson, it was everything. It was home, it was safety, it was the life they had fought to deserve. In the redwood forest of Northern California, they had found more than a refuge, they had found belonging. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they made silent promises to each other, to cherish what they had built, to protect it fiercely, and to never take for granted the miracle of having found each other in a world that had tried to convince them such love was impossible.